Delecia Davids, the first South African ever to be selected for the prestigious Einstein Fellowship. And this is going to take her to Germany for a year to work on a research project looking at memory, identity, and the stories of coloured South Africans. That's just one part of Delecia's work. She also happens to be a lecturer and researcher in Stellenbosch University's Department of Curriculum Studies, working closely on the impact of technology and particularly AI on the learning environment. And she is passionate about making universities more accessible to young people. Now, I first met Delecia in Antarctica, of all places. It was back in 2022 when she was part of the educational team for the Matrix in Antarctica program that I was lucky enough to tag along with that year. And I have to say, it's lovely to catch up with you in warmer conditions and several layers of clothing lighter. Delecia, welcome to the show.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for the invitation. But yes, I went into my archives this morning to go look at some pictures of us.
Yeah, me too. Not sure whether to share the one of us at the end of a camp out on the ice in the middle of the night, but we'll see how the interview goes. Delecia, I mean, congratulations. First of all, let's start with the Einstein Fellowship. For those who don't know what it is or what it represents and offers, let's start there. Tell us a little bit more about what the fellowship is and what it will offer you.
Thank you. The Einstein Fellowship is given to a young person under the age of 35. You don't have to be pursuing a PhD, but you have to think of quite an ambitious and original project.
Okay.
Part of your submission package is to write a 2-page proposal on something that's different from the discipline that you're studying. And part of that is, inspired by Albert Einstein. Although he's known for the theory of relativity having big impact on physics, he actually also had many informed opinions and thoughts and insights into things like education, philosophy, etc. So the idea is that, you could contribute across different disciplines and to draw on what we know in one discipline and how it could, perhaps illuminate things that are happening elsewhere.
Interesting.
So I like you said, I'm in technology and my project is obviously quite, left field from that. But I get to spend 6 months in Germany at a cottage at his summer house. And I think just that alone is incredible. And I'll be going to sites, looking at some of Germany's ways of remembering, and then bringing the stories that I will bring from South Africa into conversation with those. I will be traveling, looking at museums, the public spaces in which they remember, and really just sitting and working and thinking in a very quiet place, I'm told. So very excited.
What a gift. What an absolute gift to be given time to sit and think. There's so little time for it in the busyness of daily life. And I know your life on campus is very busy because you've made yourself involved in so much more than just the thing you're studying, Delecia. So I can understand how exciting that must be. I'm fascinated by the setting of Germany as a location for looking at storytelling and identity, because, of course, there's a country like our own that has got to grapple with a very, very difficult and problematic past, and with the remnants of that history still impacting the way they think about themselves today. Was that specifically what drew you to this fellowship, the opportunity to be in that kind of context, or is that just a sort of a happy coincidence to the fellowship?
Yeah, so I think when I started thinking about what would be relevant, I think, a lot of times these locations outside of South Africa feel like they draw to us. People go to conferences in really sunny places. But I really wanted to have a project that would be impactful for the setting in which I would be going. So when I understood that it was in Germany, I thought, what is it that I'm curious about that I could sort of only study while being in Germany? And I had a few other projects that I had in mind, but this one in particular, absolutely, their history, my own perception of how they remember, and even in our history books, we still talk about the Holocaust in our curriculum. So there was that kind of, understanding, but I think now I get to go a little bit deeper. And I think, the comparing the atrocities that happened in Germany to what has happened in South Africa, I think there's a lovely comparison, and we can, both countries can learn from one another in that regard. So absolutely, I think when I started conceptualizing the project, I did think about what could be yeah, what would be unique about being in Germany? And absolutely, I think, yeah, it's not a happy coincidence that it's there. It was very, very intentional in the way that I thought about the
Yeah.
project.
I know there's also a very deep personal sort of story behind your wanting to examine this particular aspect. Do you want to share a bit of that with us?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a long story and a short one. I'll try to do the shorter one. So, I think the first moment of it, I was a Mandela Rhodes Scholar in 2021. And we had been doing some work on reconciliation, and we had been reading a novel. And then we had this opportunity to do a poetry workshop. So it was sort of this writing for healing type of workshop, which was one of the first that I had attended. And the poet really took us through this process of writing a plantu. So these are these repeatable types of, you get these stanzas and you repeat the lines. And you don't really know because it's quick. So, you just write whatever comes to mind. And I had not even imagined that the last line of the poem ended up with the question of who am I? And it was sort of one of those moments where I went, oh, I'm going to find out the history of my grandparents and, their parents and because, my knowledge of our family on both sides really just stop at my grandparents, maybe to an extent great-grandparents, but, I never met them. And so that was one of those things where I was like, oh, one day, when I'm done with my master's, maybe I'll do it. And then fast forward, my dad passed away in 2023, and there was really like a resurgence of those questions because, I think as young people, we're inundated with our own stuff, and, our parents are sort of just happen to be around. And I think sometimes we don't ask the questions that really help us to understand who they are as people because we're growing as people. So, when he passed, I started listening to some of the music that I knew was important to him, or the stuff that we used to dance to. And particularly one was Give Me Hope, Joanna, right? This is the song that we danced to at my wedding. And at some point, I sort of actually listened to the lyrics, and I went to do a little bit of research on the song, and I realized that was actually, one of those songs of resistance. And it got me thinking, how political was my dad really back then? I know how it impacted his schooling and so on, but now those are questions that I can't ask him directly, but hopefully through this project, uncles, aunts, and so on are probably going to be sources of that. And then the last sort of piece to it was I've been working with Prof. Kumla and Willem van Woert on this kind of work on campus with Wilgenhof around, their sort of troubled history. I was doing this kind of storytelling work with them, but Prof. Kumla also had this beautiful workshop. It was called I Am From. And again, it was sort of this poetry that invoked these senses and memories of, spices in the kitchen, the sounds from my hometown. I am from Alice and John, my mom and my dad. And it really just like there was this kind of urgency of like, okay, this is a theme that's coming back
over and over
every single time. So I need to do something about it. And I think the same year I came across the Einstein Fellowship, and I thought, okay, how can I do this? And then I actually just spoke to Prof. and I said, look, I have an idea. Would you look at it for me? And I will, apply the year after. And I suppose the rest is history. But yes, those questions just, it tugs at me now. And I don't think I ever thought that this would be what I want to pursue as a real disciplined inquiry. But I think we have a lot of personal stories and questions that we can actually make relevant to, the wider community. And so I'm hoping that way.
Just for anybody coming in midway to this conversation, my guest on the line via Zoom is Delecia Davids, who will be off to Germany as part of an Einstein Fellowship, the first South African ever to be selected for this prestigious program, working on storytelling and memory and the creation of identity and how we define ourselves in our context. Delecia, just in closing, I mean, that's quite a far step away from your usual line of inquiry, besides obviously the fact that you're involved in creating identity and a sense of belonging on campus. Your key discipline is around education and the use of technology and AI in education. And understandably hearing me say that, I've immediately received emails from listeners asking about your thoughts on the role of AI in the academic setting. I mean, it's an entire show of its own, that. But just with a comment, what are you noticing in terms of? It almost feels like the horse has bolted the barn now. We can't any longer be talking about whether or not AI should be integrated into academic settings. It's already in use. The question is, how do we use it for good rather than to the detriment of the learning experience? Any sort of high-level comments on what you are encountering in your classrooms?
Yes. So look, I mean, I was just having a conversation with Sam here, and I think what's troubling for me is obviously, the cognitive offloading is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
But what that means is we outsource the best part of, or actually the part that makes us learn, which is the discomfort of learning. So, I mean, even myself, I'm at the last stages of my PhD. When I realize I don't understand something, then it's quick to want to reach, to something that's going to give me quick feedback. And that's when I know, okay, you actually need to read more, girl.
Yeah.
Because I've started looking at my own use of it. I think, in a kind of high tech culture, we also need to be emphasizing a high touch culture. So connection, slower reading, more intentional reading beyond what it is that you normally would. I think that is the markers of a good education. And I'm seeing internationally, students, young people are starting to opt out. I think there is a really interesting thing happening in the different generations, and I don't all buy into that generational argument completely, but I think some of us older people who are, we are looking for innovation, we're looking for a more efficient way of doing our work. I think we've bought into a kind of way of living and working that I think is becoming into conflict with our young people, because I think they see a bigger story that's unfolding. And so, yes, I agree that we need to figure out how to use it for good. I think there are wonderful uses for AI in a lot of different industries, and we are definitely going to, move at leaps and bounds. But I do think when it comes to learning, when it comes to education, when it comes to being a human being, are those really things that we can outsource? And should we be giving over our agency to these machines? I'm not so sure. I think it's, I was in this research group that we spoke about digital agency, but also sovereignty. So we should be building the machines better in a way that doesn't rely on human people's moral compasses to make those decisions, because in a moment of lapse of judgment, or you have a deadline looming, it's so easy to really just get to that shortcut and get a quick paragraph. But we are circumventing such the beautifulest parts of learning, and I hope that we can become a generation that really falls in love with those fundamentals again. That's what I tried to share in my classroom. I think we can be critical with technology and still use it and still find ways of having it contribute, but it cannot be at the expense of our thinking, of the way that we build friendships, relationships, and our beautiful ways of speaking and writing that are just, to us. So yeah, high level comments.
Wonderful. It's an absolutely wonderful comment, and so much for us to think about. Delecia, well, I guess my closing wish for you is that the months in Germany give you a blend of the peace, the quiet to do the deep thinking, but also the space to go into the discomfort you just spoke about and scratch in those places and read more widely. And we hope it's an incredibly enriching experience for you personally, but I know that however it might enrich you, you will bring that back to the students you will work with on your return. So all the best to you. Congratulations on being the first ever South African chosen for an Einstein Fellowship, and thank you so much for your time on the show today.
Thank you, Pippa. It's been lovely chatting to you.
You too. Great to catch up. And bon voyage, Delecia Davids, off to Germany as South Africa's first ever Einstein Fellowship.